G'day guys and welcome back to another video. In today's video we're having a wee bit of a rant about Loctite and firearms. So it seems that common wisdom among firearm owners is to, just stick a bit of Loctite on it and that fixes all of your problems. In my opinion, Loctite creates more dramas than it fixes, and we're going to delve into why that is in this video. So let's start off with talking about things on your firearm that typically people are going to use Loctite on. So typically people are going to use them on attaching bases to your rifle, attaching your scope rings to your bases, and attaching muzzle devices, be that a muzzle brake, a tuner, etc, etc. These are the most common things that people will use Loctite on. I feel like it's because people assume that, if you don't have them Loctite, then your scope's just going to magically fly off your rifle at an inopportune time and ruin your day. And I'm here to tell you that that's not quite right. So when we look at attaching something, let's say a scope base to your firearm, they're attached with a screw. Now a screw comes under a holistic thing called fasteners, and there's a certain way that fasteners are designed to work, and this is across not just firearms, this is across everything. Fasteners are designed to hold things together by friction. So you have friction between opposing threads, and you may have friction between the shoulder of the item. So the amount of friction you put in there is the amount of torque that it's holding. So for instance, when we thread a barrel onto a receiver, we don't put Loctite on the barrel, which is contrary to popular belief of, the vibration is so violent it might unscrew itself, and that doesn't happen because it has a certain amount of torque, and that torque is being held there by the friction of the part. So let's say, for instance, a Remington 700 barrel, you're looking at about 90 foot-pounds or somewhere between 80 and 100. If we can put on a barrel, and the threads are literally where the cartridge is exploding, and that doesn't come apart from, jolting and vibration, then I'm pretty sure that we can now understand that friction plays a key part into this. So when we have our fasteners, let's say going our Picatinny rail down to our action, we have the same thing occurring, right? We have a fastener, which we have threads, and the threads are going to hold that item together using friction. And in line with that, we have a certain torque value associated to give us the correct amount of friction for the fastener being used, right? So if we've got a 648 screw, which is a pretty standard screw size for putting a Picatinny rail on a rifle, and we torqued that to the same torque setting as we have as the barrel, well, that fucking fastener is going to shear in half because it's not designed to take the same torque value. So when we're talking big things like barrels, we're talking foot-pounds. When we're talking little things like fasteners for scope bases and whatever, we're talking inch-pounds. Now, typically, you're looking at about 20 to 25 inch-pounds to put a rail to a receiver. That's if it's a steel receiver. If it's an aluminium receiver like a Vernier Speedline, any of those multitude of aluminium receiver-based firearms, you're looking at dropping that down to about 15 foot-pounds. If you go above it, let's say you had it set to 25, you run the risk of stripping the thread directly out of the receiver, which is not what you want. That's the opposite of what you want, because now you have no fucking friction. So because the torque values are so low, in people's minds, they just assume that it's so little torque, I have to put thread locker on there. You don't. If it was designed to have Loctite on it, the manufacturer would tell you to put Loctite on it. However, the manufacturers do not tell you to put Loctite on it. A lot of people assume that when you buy, let's say, a pack of loopholed bases or rings, and on the threads you're going to have this blue compound. That is a thread locking compound or an anti-vibration compound. That's not the same thing as Loctite. Loctite being a low viscosity glue as opposed to a thread locker or an anti-vibration locker. The difference being anti-vibration lockers are they have a physical thickness to them, and what it's doing is it's filling up in between the threads and increasing a slight amount of friction. Conversely, the liquids are making less friction as you put them in. So some scope manufacturers, if you actually read their literature, will tell you to back off your torque setting by up to 30% when you're using a liquid-based Loctite type product. So if we have a spec of 20 inch-pounds, we're using a liquid thread locker, we would have to back that down to about 14 inch-pounds, being 30% less. If we didn't, we will be slightly increasing the amount of torque put on before the torque wrench can cam over. You will see some, testing that they've done with, does, Loctite increase torque, and some people say no, and those tests are usually done on really, really big fasteners like 1/2 inch, 1 inch, 16 millimeters, etc., which are pretty big. And you may see a slight change, which for those torque settings doesn't matter. They might be torque setting to, 100 foot-pounds, and it may change it by 3 to 5 foot-pounds, which doesn't really matter for the size of that fastener. But when you're talking about a 648 fastener that's very, very small, any slight increase can exert too much force onto that fastener and all the threads that it's going into, particularly if it's an aluminium based receiver. The torque setting on your bases is 20 to 25 inch-pounds. You go, I want it to be tight, you go to 25, and then you add Loctite. That's when you're going to have dramas. You may over torque it. You may run the risk of stripping out threads. You may stretch the fastener more than it's capable of holding, and then over time they'll actually end up loosening itself, which is counterintuitive. And the reason that is because if my fingers here are the threads themselves, as you tighten, all fasteners are designed to stretch a certain amount, which is why reusing fasteners, when it comes to things with precision, that's not really, what you want. So I'm not anti-Loctite. I'm just anti people using it in the wrong way, and that leads to dramas, and then those dramas become my dramas, and that's what annoys me. You can use Loctite, and some, particularly for your bases, and some manufacturers do say, yeah, okay, Loctite for that is fairly good, but some people are using way too much. So let's say we did want to use thread locker or Loctite on our Picatinny rail to our receiver. People are filling all of the threads up with thread locker. Here's a photo of a job I had to do the other day trying to get a pick rail off a gun because the person had put so much Loctite on. It was absolutely ridiculous, the amount that was on here. So that took a lot of heat. That took a blowtorch. Even the heat gun wouldn't break that Loctite. Blowtorch had to get brought out for that. Now, obviously, you're not going to wreck a gun by blowtorching it enough to break Loctite. You'd have to really, really, get the gun red hot to actually fuck it. So don't worry that, people are using blowtorches on guns. It's fine. It gets done all the time. And one of the other things they've done here is they've actually snapped a Torx bit off inside a screw head. Now, one, these are hex heads, not Torx heads, so why the fuck were they using a Torx head and not a hex driver? And two, the amount of torque that they would have had to put down on this to snap off the fucking tool is ridiculous. One, they've used too much Loctite. Two, they've used far too much torque, and I bet you they didn't even use a torque wrench. I reckon they just honked down on that until it went ka-snap. So yeah, there's a few things going into that. So it's just an example I wanted to show you guys of, things that have been done wrong. Now, when it comes to actually using some sort of thread locker, I typically stay away from what everyone else uses, and that's 243. 243 is a medium strength locking compound, and yes, it does have an ability to withstand some types of oils, which can be good for firearms because, oils can eat some thread locking compounds and then they no longer work. However, my personal preference is to actually use 222. 222 is much thicker. It's actually designed as an anti-vibration locker as opposed to a liquid glue type of thing that's going to actually stick your threads in there. So I prefer to use that because I'm still banking on the friction of the fastener working and not just hoping that the thread locker glues the screw into the action. And that goes for, ring tops. On any of my personal firearms, I have never once used thread locker on any of them. I've never had a scope come loose. Is that because I'm just talking them to the correct specs that the manufacturer gives me? Probably. Is it because I don't use shit quality rings? Probably. If you use poor quality rings and you give it a little bit too much torque, you'll feel the threads get loose. Then things start loosening up, and that's when people start going, well, I need to fix this, I need to put in Loctite to hold it all together. I've seen people use super glue, which is, wild in itself as well. Nail polish gets used sometimes, and that's their fix for is, instead of buying quality equipment, they're just going to buy something that's cheap and shit and then add a glue later to try and fix the fact they bought something cheap and shit. So buy quality rings, it'll do you well. Now, while we're on the topic of odd ways to fasten things, when I was down in Victoria, I did a job once where I had a guy come in with his Browning BLR. At some point during the 1990s when he was in a hound crew, he had his rail tack welded with a TIG. Not only that, some of the weld spatter had got onto the barrel, so there was a massive hump of weld spatter that was, welded into his barrel. And this was because this particular hound crew during that time had said, you can't actually hunt with us unless you have all of your scope equipment welded so it doesn't come off. Now, that blows my fucking mind that that has ever been a thing, because clearly they have no understanding of how firearms function, how fasteners work, and why that's generally a bad idea to do. But if you've been part of our hound crew and welded your shit, leave it in the comments below. I'd love to have a chat about it, because I generally think that's a fucking stupid idea. Let's touch on red Loctite real quick. So I see red Loctite used all the time on muzzle devices, being, brakes, tuners, etc. And I think it's because people assume that, red Loctite is better for heat and therefore it's better for the muzzle end. That's not really true. Red Loctite will still fail under heat, and if you've seen anything from the Americans when they're putting suppressors on, they will all tell you to steer away from red Loctite, because as soon as you fire the first mag, that Loctite is burnt up, it's gone, and it's not actually holding anything in place. You should probably actually be using Rockset and not red Loctite. Rockset is heat impervious. The way that you break Rockset is actually by soaking it in hot water, and it's actually the water molecules that will break down that glue, not the heat. So Rockset is specifically designed for that sort of application. So if you do need to do a muzzle device, use Rockset, don't use red Loctite. I have actually seen a gun once where someone red Loctited their red dot sight onto their slide on a pistol. Now that is fucking stupid. Red Loctite, or Loctite 263, is a permanent fixing Loctite. It's not designed to come off. If you are going to take it off, you need a stupid amount of heat to break the bond. You are going to fundamentally fuck your optic by using heat to take out the strength of the Loctite so you can get it off. So that in itself is pretty dumb. Don't do that. Maybe think a little bit. So the moral of this rant is I don't want you to wreck your guns, and I don't want your guns to be in such a state that I can't pull them apart when they come to me for work. So what I would ask you to do is reconsider using Loctite, reconsider which type of Loctite you use, and if you are going to use it, make sure you adjust your torque specs accordingly so our fasteners can actually act the way they're designed to act. I hope you got something out of that video. I hope it was informative, and I'll see you next video. Hooroo.